My name is Holden Triplett. I'm one of the founders of Trenchcoat Advisors. It's a small boutique advisory firm that helps businesses, startups, large companies deal with sophisticated, complex risk in our topsy-turvy world. By background, I'm an attorney, and then I came into the FBI as a special agent right after 9/11. Like a lot of people, got drawn into government because of what happened. I started my career doing counterterrorism work, spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and then switched over to counterintelligence. Spent 2 years in Moscow, 3 years in Beijing, and then a year at the National Security Council as the director for counterintelligence, really focusing on the type of really complex risks, especially those that emanate from foreign countries like China and Russia. Try to bring that knowledge to the private sector, especially the techniques about how to protect your most vital assets and your people to ensure the great value that you're creating continues to be yours and is not stolen by somebody. So the thing that startups, I think, should really be focused on is that security should start from the very beginning, from your first day. It can't be an afterthought or something that will bring in 4 or 5 years. Many of startups are creating the most incredible value from the very beginning. They've are doing cutting edge work, and it takes protection. So they should be thinking about the best ways to protect their people from the get-go, instilling that security mindset and making sure that they have the right protocols, training, policies in place to protect it for the long term. So one of the main things I think startups should think about in terms of training and policy is just building awareness among their population, among their employees. Many employees come into new businesses, startups, and can't imagine that a sophisticated criminal cyber group or nation state or social political extremists would have an interest in their company and what they're doing. But I promise you they do. And thinking about those and making everyone aware of the potential risk is a really kind of low-hanging fruit that the companies can focus on to get a lot of returns, focusing on the fundamentals, ensuring people understand what the risks are, what's the most important assets to protect, and the basics of how do they report things that are anomalous. Just getting a basic understanding and awareness around the company. I think any business of any size, large, medium, startups, should be on a yearly basis conducting some sort of risk assessment that does two things. It looks first outside, what are the groups that could have interest in what they're creating, the value, the information, the IP, and then looking inside at how are they postured to essentially protect themselves against those types of external threats. And that includes generally three types of security. You don't necessarily have to have three different programs, but one that looks at physical security, protecting your facilities, people who might try to enter them to get access to equipment, people, documents. Of course, your cybersecurity, ensuring that your networks are well protected from external individuals or groups that might try to come in. And then the last newest one that really companies are starting to focus on is the insider vector. And that's really the risk that emanates from employees. It's something that people don't always want to think about, but unfortunately their employees can often be used wittingly or unwittingly to effectuate and carry out sophisticated operations to take information to hurt companies. And that can be everything from fraud to stealing IP to even workplace violence. So looking at the insider risk and that vector is a really important part of the security apparatus. I think what I would love to help companies at Mason Enterprise Center do is to really start at the very beginning and think about how to instill a security mindset within their company from day one, so that it isn't something that they have to later try to add on. The best way to do that is to start to think about what are their most important things they're creating, their value, and then what are the basic sort of security parameters that they can put around that at a very low cost, frankly. This is really focused on new startups and the type of things they can do in order to build basic security principles into their business. A lot being created in this space that isn't protected, and waiting 4 or 5 years to start building a security program means that it's often too late. So I hope that people will come so that we can show them some very basic things about how to structure their business, how to ensure that the way they communicate, the way they protect information, the way they interact with other companies, vendors, third parties, is done in a smart way that protects the most important asset that they're creating. So in the last few years, we've seen really a market shift in the way that the government approaches outside companies and how they interact with them. First, they're doing a lot more of that. They're looking for private sector businesses to provide a lot of resources, either information, it can also be products, software, all sorts of things. But coupled with that, they're also looking very deeply into the companies themselves. They're very worried about any relationship that they establish with a private sector company that hasn't been laser focused on security from day one. That includes not just cyber to ensure that their information systems are well protected, but also ensures that they haven't set up relationships with individuals from countries of concern or set up and brought in employees that would be a potential issue. And they will dig very deep into the back of the company and who was involved from day one. They know that these sophisticated adversaries will often work for years in order to get into government. And that includes targeting private sector companies that they think will have a government contract in 5 or even 10 years. So it's important to look from day one that you've done the things that the government is looking for. And that includes really those 3 parts of having a good physical security, cybersecurity, and an insider risk program that addresses the main 3 vectors for people to come into your company. The thing we could really offer to most companies, especially startups, is helping them understand what their most valuable asset really is. And when you ask companies, often they'll say, well, it's everything. It's our people, it's our products. And that is true, of course, but you can't protect everything equally. You've got to stay laser focused on a particular part. And then helping them understand what are the basic building blocks, fundamentals that they should have in place to protect that going forward. And thinking about that kind of maturity plan. What do they look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where should that be? Certainly, the security program of a large, multinational conglomerate with 50,000 employees, much different level of sophistication than at a startup with 5 employees. But I promise you, the fundamentals are exactly the same. What they're looking at to understand external threats, understand what the most important asset is internal within the company, and how best to protect that going forward.